the creeping terror and dread of this book is one of its leading factors that makes me love it. And, you know, I'm happy to say that despite all of that, this is one of my favorite books we've read on the podcast.
That's awesome, man. Yeah.
I absolutely loved it. It's one of my favorite horror books I've ever read.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kind of horror that I adore, and it's very psychological. It's slow burn, which I found that I tend to really like. It does things through its prose and through its writing that can only be done in a book in this way. Mm-hmm. And so in that case, it's like, this is why horror works as a written genre, and it shines in a book like this. Welcome, guests, to episode 186 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss Shirley Jackson's 1959 novel, The Haunting of Hill House. All right, James, you've received a correspondence. There's a mysterious doctor who's putting together an experiment at a house widely regarded to be haunted. He has identified you a certain affinity for paranormal activity and would like for you to join him for an experiment. All food and lodging will be provided. Are you in?
I mean, I fancy myself a ghost hunter, so yeah, obviously.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Sign me up. The premise for this novel is so cool. The idea of going, and I love that there's like a real rationality to the story too. Like, you know, people are skeptics. The doctor is kind of a scientist, kind of a ghost hunter, although it's more of like academic who's like studying this kind of phenomenon. So it's really presented in an accessible way for someone like me, who is a highly skeptical person, right? And it's a really cool way to like ease me into this story. Anyway, all that is to say, I'm really loving this story. I really enjoyed this book. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I loved it. So I had this interesting experience because I have seen the show, Haunting of Hill House on Netflix. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of this like reversing to film experience that I had.
Which I haven't seen.
Yeah, and I was bringing in some of that and sort of like seeing reverse engineering it back to the source was really fun. And I mean, I was loving it. In the same way that reading the novel, this story in particular, in the same way reading the novel gets you really hyped and excited to see the eventual adaptation. The adaptation in this case was getting me really excited to see the source material, because I have heard that it's an important book. And I don't know about your copy, but I got like the Penguin Horror edition that had like a foreword by Guillermo del Toro. Did you have that?
Yes, I had a foreword. Was that who it was by? No, mine was an introduction from Laura Miller, so mine did not have the Guillermo del Toro one.
So he apparently like works as like the series editor with Penguin Horror, like the publishing company, like Penguin Publishing Company, and goes and gets like some really seminal like horror stories and like that he loved growing up, and just in general that everyone would love, and sort of like puts them all together. But the reason I loved it is he's like this like king of monsters kind of person. He loves horror, he loves everything about it, and he's almost borderline a historian at this point. He has like a house full of all kinds of collectibles. I've seen
like a tour he was doing where he was showing it to somebody. It was very cool.
Amazing stuff. But so he he approached this introduction, sort of seeding it in that history and saying like why the certain stories along the path of horror have been so important, starting with like Gothic romance and moving into like some of the more like moving into like Edgar Allan Poe and what Poe did with horror, and then moving it further from Poe into some other people, and eventually what Lovecraft would do, and then in that way set all of this up to say how Shirley Jackson was such a big part of that growth over time of the horror genre, and like how this story in particular is just it is like the haunted house story. It's like the perfect, like succinct, distilled version of a haunted house horror story.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's widely regarded as one of the best, if not the best. It's the shining example of a haunted house story in many people's eyes.
And speaking of The Shining, it kept making me think about The Shining a little bit. Like, clearly, King has read this book and then would bring some of that into his novel, The Shining.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll talk about some of the influences, but I mean, you're getting a little bit ahead of me. But King has said that he considers this novel one of the most important novels written in the 20th century.
Wow.
Yeah, it was incredibly influential on him.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, all that aside, the introduction aside and everything, what was your experience like reading it just in general? We'll get into specifics in a bio on Shirley Jackson and stuff here in a minute, but I just wanted to know some general thoughts.
Yeah, I loved it. So I'm talking about this book again, but I don't know if you can see the edges here for the people who can't see. They're like black pages, and they almost cool, shadow. Man. They shadow into the actual white here. So like there's a shadowed edge. So just in like the tangible,
okay, your copy's way cooler than mine. I'm jealous.
It's so awesome, and it's like it's got this like embossed sort of feel on the cover and stuff. Just the tangible nature of that, and like reading along with it, it was such a great experience. I loved reading this story, and it did feel present and modern, and also sort of like influential, like we've talked about, and important. And like I said, the way, like, I can reverse engineering like why they changed certain things for the show maybe, or why they didn't change certain things, and character names and some of these things that pop up and references. And so like it was a really fun way for me to experience it, and I was still surprised and taken on a journey even though I had seen the show. So I guess that's a shining endorsement. Anybody who's seen the show that is interested, I would definitely check out this book too.
Right. So it's still worth reading the book.
I think so, yeah.
Apparently I have seen an adaptation of this book because in my research I saw that there were 2 films adapted from this, both called The Haunting. Okay. One came out in 1963 and the other in 1999. Now, I have not seen the 63 version, but I did see the 1999 version. It has Catherine Zeta-Jones and Liam Neeson in it.
What a 90s cast. That's awesome.
Apparently, it's really bad. It's widely panned, but the 60s version is supposed to be very good. So definitely potential bonus episodes for us on our Patreon. We might.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be really cool. So just the title makes me think about House on Haunted Hill, and I can't remember if I like that movie or not because it's been so long since I've seen it.
Yeah, really campy horror, like early 2000s, I want to say, movie. And that's the thing, like those are the direct adaptations, but the influence of this is massive. Like so this last weekend I was at the Nebula's awards ceremony and conference, and one of the winners of award was a story by John Wiswell called Open House on Haunted Hill. Is the name of the short story that won a Nebula. So clearly a direct reference and in dialogue with this piece. So really cool. It's still influential, still far-reaching. And in fact, I was talking to Remy, a favorite of the show, and he mentioned that he sees Shirley Jackson as kind of the patron saint of horror writers, and I think that's definitely held true with what I've seen. She's beloved by a lot of people.
I mean, that's awesome to hear. I really knew the influence, like it's one of those stories where even if you haven't read it or seen it or anything like that, it's just the waves reverberate out so much from something like this, like a piece like this.
And not just this book, she has several other works that are very famous, and she died young, which we'll get into, but she achieved a lot in the time which she was writing. Which is, really incredible. So for my money, though, I just want to give my general thoughts on the book. Because I went to the conference, my reading time was a little compressed. I started the book before the conference, and then I thought maybe I'd have time where I could read some, but it ended up being like wall to wall, a lot of stuff I wanted to attend, and I couldn't read all weekend. And then so I picked it up and had a compressed reading time, which was not ideal. I wished I had been able to like spend a little more time with this book. And really let it sink into me, because the creeping terror and dread of this book is one of its leading factors that makes me love it. And I'm happy to say that despite all of that, this is one of my favorite books we've read on the podcast.
That's awesome, man. Yeah.
I absolutely loved it. It's one of my favorite horror books I've ever read. Mm-hmm. It's the kind of horror that I adore. And it's very psychological. It's a slow burn, which I've found that I tend to really like. It does things through its prose and through its writing that can only be done in a book in this way. And so in that case, it's like, this is why horror works as a written genre, and it shines in a book like this. So even despite all the things that were kind of stacked against it, I still had a great experience reading this. So definitely highly recommend this. We won't spoil anything here. We'll wait until we get into the plot summary. But if you're wondering whether or not this is a book you should check out, it's just a great horror story. The one thing I've heard from people, and I know this because I think it was a reading in my Seton Hill one year where I was at Seton Hill. A bunch of people read it who are students. I forget why, one of the classes or something, and I didn't read it at the time. But I remember it was a divisive book, and that a lot of people found it to be slow. And so much like what I would consider like more artistic films, you'll often hear that criticism of like, oh, the pacing's really slow. I couldn't get into it, or I got bored. You hear stuff like that. That seems to be the criticism that gets leveled at this book. It is not like a flashy, there's not a ton of actiony sequences. There's not a ton of big scares with like, I don't know. It's not as flashy as a lot of modern horror. And if that's going to be a problem, I could see people not loving this book. But if you're into creeping dread that builds into something, it doesn't go nowhere. It's not just creeping dread that doesn't go anywhere. Like, it really does crescendo into an awesome finale. And throughout the book, there's great moments. And a book that really seeps into you, that really shows you the inside of someone's mind as they're being affected by what's happening. If that all sounds interesting to you, then I definitely highly recommend this book, because that's the kind of stuff I love, and that was on display here.
On this podcast, we've said many times, like the slow burn when it's worth it. You know, there are, of course, I've seen films and I've read things that are slow burns and then ultimately like are, you know, they don't go anywhere. But this is not that case. Like you said, your
patience is paid off, right? Like something comes in.
and I think that there's something to be said for like the, you know, fast paced age we live in now. Like, maybe like I love taking it slow with stories sometimes and just living in that world. Like, I can't, like, a great film when I'm sitting in a theater or whatever, it like, you want it to just last forever, and then that's why, like, I can really appreciate a slow burn film, and then a lot of times there's a lot more to dig into on repeat viewings. But I was gonna say I appreciated the restraint in this story. You're talking about the, like, maybe not necessarily like modern flashiness in a horror film, but I appreciated it for that, because it felt so much more on the edge of your peripherals, and it's like you said, creeping dread, and it makes it feel more atmospheric to me. It makes it feel like something that that we're in the house with them in a way, and of course that like the house is a character in itself, and that's another thing that I thought Jackson did extremely well. Was, I know we've said it before, even last week we said with the Murder on the Orient Express, the train is like a character. This book, in this book, the house on Haunted Hill is like legitimately a character.
Absolutely.
In so many ways, and like it's set up early on where it's less so.
Well, and I would say that's true in any good haunted house story. The house should be a character.
It has to be.
Yeah.
And so but the subtlety to which it's done is like early on there's not as much, but then we start to, you know, anthropomorphize, I don't know if that's the right word, but sort of like the house is brought to life in ways that like the what you're seeing around the house is described. And
the point of view is extremely close to Eleanor, but at times we get these like omniscient narrator moments, and that's some of the times where we get the house being personified, right? In ways that I think you're talking about.
Well, and even and even our main characters at certain points will, like, as the book progresses, they'll look around and see something that shouldn't happen in a house and that sort of thing. And it's just like the way that it builds to that, I thought was really, really nicely done. So,
I mean, so much to get into once we get into the nitty gritties. And I want to talk about Shirley Jackson, but one thing I want to do, and maybe this will become a segment for us. We've talked about how we don't have many segments, but at times I've done this on the show, I realize, and we just have never come up with a name for it.
What's our one segment, our one famous segment? Would you do it?
Would you do it? I kind of let off with that this time.
Yeah.
Our famous.
It's our famous segment. Everyone knows.
No, so this one I thought we'd call like Luke's Bangin' Book Beginnings. I don't know. We can workshop the name.
Yeah.
But basically, like, I love a good opening for a book.
Yeah.
And I'm just a geek about that kind of stuff. And not every book is it's not a make or break thing. You can have a great book that has a kind of forgettable beginning. But I love it when you have a great book with a great beginning. And that's what we have here. So I would like to read the opening paragraph of this book, which I think is one of the best perhaps ever written, especially in the horror genre. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed, by some, to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. So good, so atmospheric. It sets up so many things about this book. Because that's what, in my opinion, a great opening does, is it gives you in a moment a taste for what's in store. And I think that is a perfect example of that. That paragraph is what this book is. And it's so good.
And without being too obvious too, like, of course you kind of know what the title of the book and like with that paragraph, you kind of get like what's going on, but you have no idea. I mean, it is really in
like its essence, right? Like that feel of that paragraph is the feel of the book.
Right.
I don't know. I love the idea of these katydids like dreaming, and it's so sprawling. It does things that like common wisdom tells you not to do, because it's starting with, there's no real character there. It's just like it's almost like setting. It's starting with setting. But it does it so well that it's one of those times where it's like, yeah, if you do it this well, you can do anything you want. Right. And it just nails it. Okay, let's move into talking about the woman herself, Shirley Jackson. So, she was an American writer known primarily for her works of horror and mystery. Over the duration of her writing career, which spanned over 2 decades, she composed 6 novels, 2 memoirs, and more than 200 short stories. Born in San Francisco, Jackson attended Syracuse University in New York, where she became involved with the university's literary magazine and met her future husband, Stanley Edgar Hyman. After they graduated, the couple moved to New York and began contributing to The New Yorker. The couple settled in North Bennington, Vermont. After publishing her debut novel, The Road Through the Wall, in 1948, she gained significant public attention for her short story The Lottery, which presents the sinister underside of a bucolic American village. She continued to publish numerous short stories in literary journals and magazines throughout the 1950s, and in 1959 she published The Haunting of Hill House, a supernatural horror novel widely considered to be one of the best ghost stories ever written. In an era where women were not encouraged to work outside the home, Jackson became the chief breadwinner, while also raising the couple's 4 children. According to Jackson's biographers, her marriage was plagued by Hyman's infidelities, notably with his students, and she reluctantly agreed to his proposition of maintaining an open relationship. Hyman also controlled their finances, meting out portions of her earnings to her as he saw fit, despite the fact that after the success of The Lottery and later work, she earned far more than he did.
I think I've read The Lottery, by the way. I'm pretty sure
Really?
that, I think that, one of my teachers recommended it in school to me.
I was thinking about how much I want to read it because it sounds awesome.
Yeah, I swear that I've read that story. I'm pretty sure. I'm going to have to look into it after this.
Apparently it has a short film adaptation too, so we could look into that. I don't know how well known it is, but we can look into it. So her son Lawrence said she did work hard. She was always writing or thinking about writing, and she did all the shopping and cooking too. The meals were always on time, but she also loved to laugh and tell jokes. She was very buoyant that way. By the 1960s, Jackson's health began to deteriorate significantly, ultimately leading to her death due to a heart condition in 1965 at the age of 48. From what I was seeing, she was known for being this intensely funny, but she had a dark side to her, and she could snap at people a little bit. They would throw these big parties at her house, and she and others and her family and in that group were just known for being prodigious drinkers, smokers, and they would throw these wild literary parties that you hear about. So she lived intensely, I guess is what I'm trying to say. She was into witchcraft and stuff. I think she studied it some for her books. So she was, I don't know. She would often write these books that have these like mousy, quiet girl protagonists. And so for that reason, I think she's also beloved by a lot of like women horror writers who just really saw themselves in a lot of these characters that she would have front and center. And we have one here in Eleanor. Often there's actually a pair of women who have, you know, really interesting dynamic relationship. And we have that here too.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that's apparently present in a lot of her work. Another novel that she's really known for is We Have Always Lived in the Castle. I know I've heard of that one. I think there may be an adaptation for that one too. I would love to come back and do some more Shirley Jackson just because of how much I love this novel. So I'd be really, really interested in that. Unfortunately, some of her health conditions seem to have been linked partially to maybe her lifestyle, but also to different prescription drugs she would take. Some of them for mental health issues, other ones I think for weight loss. I heard somewhere. So she was on all these different medications that may have contributed to heart problems. I don't know, but I mean to die at 48 is tragic, and but to still have made this kind of a mark on the literary world is pretty amazing, and to raise 4 children at the same time she's doing all of this, and apparently this kind of a dirtbag husband sounds like she was dealing with.
So did she see the like success of her labors before she passed away? It sounds
she
like
did.
Right?
Because she was making good money. However, her husband controlled their finances. So It was like he was kind of living high off of it and just like giving her allowance. Is kind of what it seems like.
Wow.
You know, so yeah. That's what I'm seeing. I obviously don't know all the details. I did want to say, I read here that Shirley Jackson has been cited as an influence on many different authors, including some notable names that we've covered on the podcast, including Neil Gaiman, Stephen King, and Richard Matheson. Have all cited her as like a key influence. And I can definitely see Neil Gaiman. I don't know, I was thinking about Coraline a little bit with this book. I mean, obviously Eleanor's not like a young child, but she is kind of had childlike mind at times. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I was just thinking about Neil Gaiman. It seems like the kind of book he would love. And in fact, I think he was the one who said that it's the scariest novel he's ever read. Yeah, when someone asked him what the scariest novel he ever read was, he listed this one. That's
awesome. Like you said, to make that kind of impact in such a short period of time is amazing. And like, you know, these people that we respect immensely, like I assume that she also was the author of Frankenstein, who also had massive impact.
Mary Shelley, yeah. I thought it was Shelley. I assume like also similarly, like I'm sure all of these people would say that she's an influence on them as well, just based on her impact in horror with Frankenstein. So one thing I saw that was interesting is that when she was writing this novel, she went and read a ton of other horror, like haunted house stories that were out at the time to like know the genre well. And one of the ones she read is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. Was one of the like key influences for this novel. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, that novella, The Turn of the Screw, is the basis for The Haunting of Bly Manor, which is the second season, it's sort of season. It's like a installment in this haunting Mike Flanagan run, I think. I assume both are run by him. I actually don't know. But series on Netflix.
Yeah. I watched part of that one as well. So maybe we cover that at some point. I would like to cover that because I've heard of The Turning of the Screws before.
Yeah. Turning of the Screw is an 1898 novella too. So going way back on that one.
Let's do it.
Yeah, it could be cool. So, I mean, I know some other stuff. I watched some videos talking about her. I read some stuff, but I think it's time to move into plot. And then if anything comes up, I'll mention it. I have 4 paragraphs here of plot I'll read, and we can kind of react to each chunk as we move through. As we go into this, we're going to start getting into spoilers, so be aware. So, Hill House is a mansion in a location that is never specified, but is between many hills. The story concerns 4 main characters. Dr. John Montague, an investigator of the supernatural. Eleanor Vance, a shy young woman who resents having lived as a recluse caring for her demanding disabled mother. Theodora, a bohemian artist implied to perhaps be in a relationship with a woman. And Luke Sanderson, the young heir to Hill House, who is host to the others. Dr. Montague hopes to find scientific evidence of the existence of the supernatural. He rents Hill House for a summer and invites several people whom he has chosen because of their experiences with paranormal events. Of these, only Eleanor and Theodora accept. Eleanor travels to the house, where she and Theodora will live in isolation with Montague and Luke. Hill House has 2 caretakers, Mr. and Mrs. Dudley, who refuse to stay near the house at night. Okay, so let's stop here and talk about, our main characters and the introduction of Hill House, because I think there's a lot to talk about there.
I just want to say one more thing about just kind of more generally, the way that stories like this make me love horror can't be overstated. Like I like am hungry for more horror right now just because of how good this was. And I feel like I underrate horror in my mind sometimes. Like I know it's one of my favorite genres, but it's when I read something like this or consume like a piece of horror that I'm like, God, it's like up there. It's like it edges out. Like every once in a while it'll be my favorite genre, easily. And like a story like this, like I'm completely in the mood for horror now. And like while reading this, I also watched the show on Amazon called Truth Seekers. And it's kind of this like it's awesome. It's Nick Frost and Simon Pegg wrote it, and they're both in it as well. But it's this show. It came out in 2020, and they're like one of them is like a Wi-Fi installer, so he like sets up routers and everything for people. He's like an internet service provider worker, and he also on the side has a YouTube channel where he's like a supernatural investigator, like ghost gotcha. Kind of like so he's going into houses and setting up Wi-Fi, but then also realizing that they're like crazy, ghost stories that are happening in the background, and it's really fun because each episode is like really self-contained. But I just like watching that while also reading this, and it's really just like kickstarted me to the point where I'm like, all right, I feel like it's October already, like it's time to start consuming all of the horror, and I just like am so. I don't know. I'm in love with this story, and I can't I can't state that enough, I guess.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. Horror cannot be confined to a single month. It has to be it has to be year round. I'm with you. It's I'd be so hard pressed to choose. Fantasy, sci-fi, and horror. I list them all 3 as genres that I write. When I list them, because I do write all 3. I do love all 3 equally in my eyes. Like I really am hard pressed to pick between them.
Yeah, and they all blend together really nicely.
And they all blend together. Right. I love it when they start. Those lines are not so clear. But anyway, let's talk about our characters. So I love how each character gets like a moment where we see them in their like home environments, except for the Doctor. Not really the Doctor, but we get the other 3. And I did think it was funny. There's a character named Luke in this book. Luke Sanderson. Yeah. He's introduced as being a liar and a thief. I was like, oh, here we go. But he ends up not being like too bad. I don't know. He's not great, but he's and that's one of the things I actually really liked about this book is how every character is flawed. They're introduced as being people who are, I don't know. They're not great, but they're also like it's a really rich character study on each of them in a way, especially Eleanor and Theodora to a lesser extent.
And I love how it feels tropey when we're introduced to these characters at first. Like you feel like the archetypes right away, but they aren't really that neat and orderly. Like I love the way that sort of it like you said, it's a nice character piece because it does explore these characters in ways I don't think most people would expect.
Mm-hmm. So Eleanor in particular, I think she's our main character for the most part. She's the one whose point of view we're closest to. So I want to talk a little bit about her because when we first meet her, I think it's like talking all about how she hates all of her family members. She's like, there's not anybody she hates more than this person and that person. And she seems like kind of a nasty person when we're first introduced to her. But then we get her like sneak out and get the taxi and go steal the family car, essentially.
Yeah.
And she has this moment where she runs into an old woman and then like ends up paying for her taxi cab ride home. And I thought that was maybe like a save the cat moment. Just as a writer, I was like, why is this moment in here? It feels weird. And then I realized that it was immediately sort of rehabilitating her in our eyes because we see how apologetic she is, how friendly she is to this woman, how bad she feels. It was more her situation
than maybe her personality in general.
And then we get this ride where she's driving through the countryside and she's very dreamy. And I think it works perfectly. We're so deep in her mind and we're getting all of these fantasies she's having as she's approaching the Hill House. and she sees this house with these lions on the end, and she imagines, oh, what if that was where I was going? What if I was going to live in a house like that? And she dreams about this. She meets this child who has this glass with stars in it and wants her star cup and stuff. And she starts like imprinting on this girl and like identifying with her strongly, so much so that later on she tells a story that is essentially that about herself. And it's unclear whether or not that's a complete fabrication. I think it might be. Or if she just is like reality is getting blurred. But all of this is happening and she's feeling great. She's like loving life. She's so optimistic about where her life's going. And this whole time we know she's approaching Hill House, which has been set up by the opening to be this evil place. And we're like, uh-oh. So you feel this dread of like, what's she in for? She's so full of life that I immediately just loved this character. Like I deeply empathized with her, and I just wanted nothing but the best for her. And I know that wasn't what was going to happen, but I just strongly identified with her.
The other characters sort of almost right away see her as like weaker and more gullible and, treat her a certain way based on that. They treat her like a child, like you said earlier, a little bit sometimes. But like, because we're getting the inner thoughts, we are not on the same page as those characters who are seeing her in that light. And I think that's an interesting perspective to put on the main character.
Yeah. Well, and then we get this moment where she goes into this house, I think it's called, or this town, I think it's called Hillsdale. It reminded me of like a lot of scenes from different movies where it's like she's all happy and then she comes into this like there's like flies. I feel like it was like all, I don't even know there was, but it feels like there is. It's all run down. There's like this woman behind the counter who's like really kind of rude, and this strange guy looking at her, and they're like making fun of her for being out there, and they're the locals, and both of them like hate it here, and they're like, why would you ever come out here? We have no tourists. And then that's like her first like moment of uh-oh, maybe this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And then you follow that up with her arriving at the house, which at first is like super scary, right? Or like spooky, in her interaction with the groundskeeper who tries not to let her in, and she has to like fight her way in, basically. Like she's not actually fighting, but she has to like negotiate.
This story does an interesting thing with humor too. Like I wasn't expecting it to be quite as funny as it, and it's not like on clever. The face, like funny, and it's not jokes and stuff. It's more like situational, if you want to put yourself in that situation. The way that she's dealing with the groundskeeper and like the way their interaction goes is just, it's like, it's off-putting, but it's also kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, and then she meets this Mrs. Hubbard character. Is it Mrs. Hubbard, or am I getting that? Mrs. Dudley. Sorry, Mrs. Hubbard was last week.
Yeah.
Mrs. Dudley, the woman, and she gives her this speech, and Mrs. Dudley throughout is, I think a key source of comedy, because she has these things that she just says over and over again, and she gives her this very ominous speech as she walks her up to her room, and this whole time like she hates the house immediately when she sees it. She's like reviled by it. She's like, this house is gross. It's I want to turn around and leave immediately as soon as I see it. So it's not what she thought it was going to be. But she's like being game, and she takes her up to the blue room, because each room they're in is like color coded.
Yeah, and I will say, I don't think the look of it was that it was gross. I think it was more the vibe that she was getting from it. Well, because she's potentially got these psychic powers is kind of the implication, how she was chosen. So yeah, maybe it's psychically she feels the evilness of it. Or it could also just be like, intuition. Like people, like I get, if you go into a situation or like a place, you might feel like, oh, this has a weird vibe. Yeah. Like something like that.
Well, and they describe some reasons later why it also could be. It seems like it's like it starts to feel kind of claustrophobic, which is interesting because it's so big. But once they get in there, they feel like they're trapped, right? Like they've entered into this trap, they can't leave, and it's like it's described as being very soft. Like there's a lot of lace, there's a lot of cushions, all this stuff. Yet it almost like suffocating, like a pillow would be suffocating. You know what I mean? Like,
well, one of my favorite parts was when they say like all these like amazing chairs, and then you sit on them and they're like hard. Yeah, and they're not. They
look inviting, but they're not.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then there's a part later on where they start talking about the layout of the home.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite part. I just love that this was in this story. This kind of stuff always fascinates me, and they even reference the other home that's sort of
the Winchester house.
Winchester house,
which I've never been to, but I know about. I've seen videos about it. I've heard from people who've actually been to it, and I was thinking the whole time, I'm like, I wonder if this was inspired by the Winchester house. I should look that up and see if it was like in existence at the time this book was written. And then sure enough, it gets mentioned in the book itself. So it was kind of lampshaded. But yeah, the description of the home is that it's this giant mansion. It's freaking huge. But it's like not at right angles and it's not level. And so like everything's just a little bit off.
I think that the way they described it is like every corner is like a couple degrees off. So like if you're in a window looking out at the front yard when you should, if it was laid out like a normal,
like square-ish, rectangle-ish house,
symmetrical, then you would be able to look out and see the driveway. And like in certain rooms, because of the way that like it's twisted over time, because it's such a large thing, that those small incremental shifts in degrees make it so that it's like you can't even see the driveway from certain, so it's all very like
it's disorienting, right? And
wonky,
they keep getting lost. There's like a million doors, there's all these little hallways and stuff. I love that. And I don't know if you've ever been in like really old buildings like this, but this is like legit. Like some of these buildings definitely feel this way, and I think she's playing it up to an even more extreme state. But like even my college I got my MFA in, Seton Hill, is a very, very old building. Certain parts of it, and it feels like this. Like there's weird passageways. Some of the stairs seem like weirdly sized, and all of a sudden something opens up into a hallway.
Small door.
Yeah, there's like a little weird door. There's a hallway you didn't expect to be there. Like there's all kinds of weird stuff like that. And so I totally was buying that. But anyway, yes. Then Theodora comes in, and I loved how quickly they have this like intense bond. Like they're immediately like really close. They both realize that this house is awful, yet it seems like if they're gonna make it through this, it's gonna be through like the strength of their friendship. And they kind of go on a walk together out in the garden, and it seems like the garden's not so bad. Although they do see somebody, I think, like I see a figure or something at one point, so some spooky shit happens. But
one of the main things that worked for me with that too was like they had this thing where they felt like they were almost like reverting to children, and they were running through the garden at some points, and like sort of like that sort of friendship that you have with somebody where you feel comfortable doing anything right away, and they felt like kids again. And so like that sold me on their relationship really quickly. I thought that was smart.
Yeah, and then later on, when we learn more about the house, they discover that there were two daughters who lived here and grew up here, and then had this really bad falling out and nastiness as they got older. And even though you don't know that at the time, I like the idea of that parallel, right? Like they are sisterly here, and they almost seem like little girls playing together.
Yeah. And they immediately they call themselves like cousins or something right away. And they're trying to like force their families. They're trying to say like, you were, I went here and you must be like a relative of this person in my family. So somewhere along the way we're family. And they were like, just like kind of selling themselves on that.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, right? Because like Eleanor has like left her life where she felt trapped, and she is seeking adventure, and she's seeking the vibrancy of a new start, and she's thinking about these exciting people she's going to meet at this exciting place, and she's going to be a new woman, and she's going to be remade by this, and instead she falls into the trap that is Hill House. And there is a read of this book that a lot of what the supernatural stuff that is happening, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but anyway, that some of the supernatural stuff that's happening could be being caused by Eleanor, because she has this sort of telekinetic power potentially. And so it's like she gets caught up in the house, and whatever that force is, starts seeping into her mind. And as much as I loved all the setup, I really loved when we started to see the effects of the house on her. So let's start. Well, real quick, we got to talk about Dr. Montague a little bit. I actually thought he was really charming. I expected him to be this like, scary doctor type who's maybe kind of aloof and like, I'm just running an experiment. I don't want to get involved. But he was like super charming. He was playing chess with them. He was eating with them. He just seemed like a guy. Seemed really open about what was going on. Seemed like he didn't want anybody to get hurt. So he's like wanted to be careful. All that stuff, it made me like him a lot. I thought he was cool.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that, in the traditional, if you see like a film from like the 50s or the 40s and there's like a scientist in it and he's sort of like, there's experiments going on or there's like something he's studying, like typically that person is like not necessarily to be trusted.
Yeah.
And in this case, he's like inviting them to a haunted house, and like that seems creepy on its own. Like what are his ulterior motives? and it turns out like he doesn't necessarily have any. He was just really trying to study the ghosts and stuff or whatever.
He's basically what he said he's doing is exactly what he's doing. He wasn't like doing secret experiments on them or anything, which I was kind of watching out for. No, he wasn't really doing any of that.
And he's also the character who is sort of doubting everything along the way. Like he's got all the solutions for why people did certain things and why things turned out the way they did. And then also like he's the person who's sort of describing the reason why the house, all the doors like close on their own is because of the different angles and the way that it's shifted and you know the wind through there. And so like he's always the person who's sort of giving you the plausible deniability to be like, it's not ghosts, it's, you know, whatever he's saying, it's just something in the real world.
He's the voice of reason, right? Yeah
Him
and Luke a little bit, because Luke is also not sort of psychically attuned. It's really only Theodora and Eleanor who are, and it is interesting, right? It's the two men aren't. And although they do see like a dog at one point that they chase out into the night.
Well, they start to see things like
they see some stuff, but most of the time it's Eleanor exclusively, and sometimes Eleanor and Theodora who are experiencing most of it. I
think as we get further along in the story, we see everybody starts to see more and more, because obviously the occurrences start to be more. I don't know, severe.
Yeah, there's definitely stuff happening. The question, I guess, is it being caused by the house itself, or is Eleanor doing something with it too? But you know, just talking about it, this does really remind me of The Shining, right? With the kid, what's the kid's name? Danny, right? Because the whole thing is that Danny's telekinesis,
sort of powering,
his shining is the thing that the like hotel wants. So
it's feeding off of it almost.
Exactly. And that you could say that maybe is happening here too. Maybe Hill House is feeding off of this power in Eleanor. So Stephen King, I mean, that book may be greatly inspired by this one. You know, that's just the way these things work. And you know, it's okay to be inspired by people, and you can take it and do something a little different and still have some of that same DNA there.
And really, like, you could, like you said, it's a reading of it. You could also say that the house itself just is doing this, and she just so happens to be the person, because she has this telepathic power. Maybe that's the most interesting thing to the house, so they're after her.
It makes her potentially just an easier victim for the house.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then someone like Stephen King reads this and it says, like, what if I shift it slightly and say that it definitely is feeding off of her, and like that's why what's powering that. It's almost like a battery for the house.
Yeah.
When she's there, kind of thing.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, let me read the next paragraph of a summary. The 4 overnight visitors begin to form friendships as Dr. Montague explains the building's history, which encompasses suicide and other violent deaths. All 4 of the inhabitants begin to experience strange events while in the house, including unseen noises and ghosts roaming the halls at night, strange writing on the walls, and other unexplained events. I think ghosts roaming the halls is maybe a bit poetic license in the person who wrote this summary. There are weird events happening, maybe ghosts, we don't know.
Things right out of like I said, like things that they don't necessarily see but feel like something moved.
Or they hear like footsteps, or they hear banging. It happens at one point. Eleanor tends to experience phenomena to which others are oblivious. At the same time, Eleanor may be losing touch with reality. The narrative implies that at least some of what Eleanor witnesses may be products of her imagination. Another implied possibility is that Eleanor possesses a subconscious telekinetic ability that is itself the cause of many disturbances experienced by her and other members of the investigative team. So that's a bit of editorializing here in the summary, but I do agree with that. Like, it's definitely given as a possibility that she could be kind of causing. And there's a particular moment where she says, and this, like, there's so many creepy moments that almost give me chills to talk about, where she says, how can they be hearing the sound? It's coming from inside my head.
Yeah.
And that, like, is a really creepy moment, and that does kind of imply that, like, what if she's causing this to happen?
There, as it gets further along in the story, there are moments where it's near the end, it's kind of implied that, like, some of this stuff maybe was her doing, and, like, you know, like you said, maybe her, because I mean, I don't think it's really, we're spoiling things right now anyway.
I think it's
like
fine,
it doesn't matter. But nearing the end, you know, there's banging on doors and things throughout, and then nearing the end, she actually goes around banging on doors and doing almost everything that's being talked about in the story up to this point.
Interesting though, early on, one of the key turning points in her relationship with Theodora, I think, is when Theodora accuses her of writing. There's like her name, this like message appears written in chalk on the walls.
Yeah, I think that's the first real, like, sort of splintering of the group.
Because Theodora, like, accuses her of writing it herself. Mm-hmm. And which I was unclear because I thought they were like together the whole time. I don't know. I was like, when would she have done this? I don't know.
Right. Luke is the only one who left the group at that point.
Yeah, but I do love the idea of this, like, because in real life, if a fucking writing appeared on a wall and I was with some strangers, I would assume somebody wrote it. You know what I mean? I wouldn't assume a ghost wrote it. So it is the kind of thing that would happen, and I love that they start after starting out so friendly, they all start kind of turning on each other a little bit. And I noticed that the language Shirley Jackson uses shifts. And she starts describing things as being annoying, as being irritating, as maddening. I could strangle her. Like, she starts thinking like these, like mean thoughts about Theodora and like violent thoughts. She starts, and different people are grating, and she finds someone to be stupid. And she, all of a sudden, Eleanor, who was so like, bubbly and full of life early on, now is starting to get mean and like judgy and angry. And this is the kind of stuff where it's like the prose shifts, and we start to, the effect of the house is subtly changing the way she perceives reality. And as that starts to happen, that's like my favorite shit, right? Because that's next level writing stuff where you are seeding in a change in personality through the diction you're using, through the tone, and through the word choice, and just everything. And it's done so well. It's clever, subtle stuff that I think writers should pay attention to if they read this.
That's the thing that really worked for me too. Was it's not like a switch flipped. It's just like a little thing at first, and then a little bit more later, and then as time goes on, nearing the end, she's like talking in her head about like, I want to hurt them, I want to kill them, stuff like that. And you're like, holy shit!
Yeah,
like we're off the deep end now.
Yeah, well, and she's just losing it, right? Okay, so. Couple things happen in this part I do think we should talk about. They find this statue, and they find this like study, and the statue is really weird, and they all have different takes on like what it could be. And we keep hearing about Crane and his daughters, and how he had multiple wives who died here, and then he had these daughters who were raised here by their governess while he was like off in Europe or something. So they were like basically alone here, which just sounds miserable. And yeah, there's all these artifacts they keep finding. And then at one point they find this book that apparently he wrote for his daughters, and it's very religious and creepy, and it's got all these drawings in it.
Well, and he has little comments in the margins for his daughters who are reading it, or his daughter. Yeah.
And I multiple times, this novel kind of turns away from certain details, and I think it's really interesting because it's that thing that people always talk about. And it's almost a cliche to talk about, but like the unseen being scarier than the seen sometimes, and the imagination feeling, and there's so much of that going on here, and it's true. I mean, that is a real thing, and it's not easy to achieve. But here she is as well, and like there's like a part where she doesn't want to look at hell in the book because she's seen these, like, she's already frightened Eleanor by seeing some of these drawings. And so she looks away, and we just get Luke's reaction to it as he's like looking at it. He's like, oh yeah, this is the worst one. And so you kind of get to fill in the blanks with your mind. You don't ever get a direct description of what's in there. And that kind of stuff is the same way that a lot of the more horrifying moments are dealt with. And like, there's this particular moment where she goes on this like mind-bending walk with Theodora, where like the grass turns white and the path turns black, and they go, and then all of a sudden they're in this garden with there's like a picnic happening, all this color, and then Theodora starts yelling, to like screaming to like run, something's coming, and then she runs, and she never looks back to see what it is. And we only hear the description of what Theodora's saying out, something was chasing us, and it's never really described. And that's the moment I'm talking about, where like, that's almost more terrifying because you don't know what it was.
Yeah, it's great. It really is good. That scene was amazing. We never see a creature in this, right?
Yeah.
So like so one of the examples I've given about like King, for example, is like in The Shining, we get like a creature eventually that's like he has to sort of describe the intentions, and like we don't necessarily get all of that in this story. We don't get intention, we don't get a final like look at the thing.
I wonder
what
if
it is and what it does.
There's something cinematic there. I mean, obviously King is not making a movie when he writes The Shining, but in movies a lot of times I feel like there's this promise that you have to like see something, and that if an audience goes away not having seen a ghost or having seen a manifestation of some kind, they're going to feel like they've been cheated.
A little bit, yeah, and like for a general audience, I would say that this, even more so the case, because I think it would be seen as more artsy if you were to like not show it eventually and have it sort of be like this looming presence that, because like you said, it's like a monster will get asses in seats, right? Like you want to show something like that eventually, like these like obviously the example of like Alien, where it's lurking, there's like small shots of it, and then eventually by the end you see like most of it, and then that's like you've seen it. And then once you've seen it, then Aliens comes out and they're like, now let's just have like 10 of them running around and like they're fucking all over the place and you see them like a lot.
Still a great movie.
Still both great examples of good movies, but
two very different approaches.
I also wanted to talk about where they're going through this threshold that's like really cold.
Oh, the cold spot, yeah.
I loved that. And like, because everybody's kind of felt something like that before. And these universal like things that, of course, like, if you turn your eyes or something like that and you see like the shadows in your eyes, like we're just to the edge of what you can't see, if you do that by yourself at night, like you might freak yourself out.
With something moving. I thought I saw something moving.
If you feel like a gust or like something cold as you're walking through somewhere, like I just love using those universal, like it's like fucking with our fight or flight responses as like human beings, as like our species was built on that. And so like I love that this genre like is diving into something so visceral and so like baked into our like beings as our biological makeup to deliver stories like this. And I just thought that was so much fun. The threshold is great because it's like right in the library or the study or something like that.
I think it's going into the nursery. I want to say it was
the
like
nursery. That's what it was. Yeah, and then of course that leads into Montague's wife, who we'll get to eventually.
So one of the other cool details about the cold spot is that he gets a thermometer to come measure it like the next day or something, and he can't detect any difference in temperature, which I just love that detail, right?
But they can all feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do. I want to also get across that not the house is not only affecting Eleanor. It's just, I think, most strongly affecting her. But I definitely got the implication that Theodora was also being turned against Eleanor a little bit by the house. Like, I think it was driving a wedge between them. Because she starts treating her very differently too. And in fact, it seems to be the one to first turn. Like, she turns on Eleanor before Eleanor turns on her.
And it kind of happens with the stuff we were talking about with the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
Like, she like is like blaming her, and then everybody treats her a little differently from then on.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden she starts calling her like proud and like I don't know, like just being kind of insulting and dismissive also at the same time. Condescending. Yeah. And like her and Luke start to have like something going on, maybe a romantic thing later on.
They're just excluding her regardless of whatever's going on with them. They're excluding Eleanor.
Yeah. Which Eleanor picks up on immediately and starts feeling like an outsider again. But also one of the things that's really cool is how Eleanor never felt like she belonged anywhere. And one of the like siren calls, I think, of Hill House for her is that it welcomes her. Like, it wants her there eventually. And she starts to feel that. She starts to feel like, this is where I'm supposed to be. Whether or not it's a pleasant place to be, she does feel like she belongs. It feels like home to her. And that is one of the things that ends up being like one of the most seductive, I think, for her. And we can see why. Like, she's done such a good job of setting up this character who desperately wants to feel like she belongs somewhere. And
she feels wanted or important. So like a purpose at that place. And it is so interesting because she acknowledges almost the entire time through that it is like I think she feels the influence and she feels the pull from Hill House, and also at the same time is like, but it's scary and I can't, I can't be alone. There's like a lot of that going on where like they can't be alone in any rooms and go through doors, anything like that.
Yeah.
So she's always acknowledging the fact that like it's not necessarily the nicest place to be and it's kind of scary, but also sense of belonging is important, like you said to her.
Yeah. All right, let me read the next paragraph because it has some of the creepiest shit in it. Later in the novel, the bossy and arrogant Mrs. Montague and her companion Arthur Parker, the headmaster of a boys' school, arrive to spend a weekend at Hill House and help investigate it. They too are interested in the supernatural, including seances and spirit writing. Unlike the other four characters, they do not seem to experience anything supernatural, although some of Mrs. Montague's alleged spirit writings seem to communicate with Eleanor. Much of the supernatural phenomenon that occurs is described only vaguely, or else are partly hidden from the characters themselves. Eleanor and Theodora are in a bedroom with an unseen force trying the door, and Eleanor believes after the fact that the hand she was holding in the darkness was not Theodora's. Okay, I don't like the way that was written, because that's one of the scariest moments in the entire thing, is that she thinks she's clutching Theodora's hand, and you think that it's this nice moment because they've just had their first fight, like real fight, and so you're like, okay, now that they're both scared, they're like taking solace in each other's company, and she's like clutching her hand desperately at this pounding and this. Actually, it's like I think there's when the child is like crying, and she's thinking about a child being abused, and she can hear this murmuring in the other room, and she's clutching this hand, and then she like finally screams something at the other room of like, I can't take this anymore or something, and then Theodora wakes up and it's like, what's going on? And like she realizes that she was not holding her hand, and she doesn't know whose hand she was holding, and it's, you know, chills when that happens. Like,
right.
cool moment.
Great scene. I also really like the first scene where there's like a full-on paranormal experience where they're like trapped in the room and it's something's banging on the door, and how like that scene creeped me out for sure. That scene was really creepy because it's like they're just like huddling together in the room, and they're like I think they eventually call or scream out or something like that.
Yeah.
And Luke and Montague show up, and there's like no marks on the door, even though the door was like being like blasted off its hinges by the blows that were hitting it, and creepy scene.
Yeah. Okay, so a little bit left in this paragraph. In one episode, as Theodora and Eleanor walk outside Hill House at night, they see a ghostly family picnic that seems to be taking place in daylight. Theodora screams in fear for Eleanor to run, warning her not to look back, though the book never explains what Theodora sees. Okay, we already talked about that scene. It's good. That's another really good, weird... There's a couple of times where I think it's Shirley Jackson is playing with us because she seems to set up the outdoors. Like if you're really having a hard time inside the house, get out into the garden and you'll feel a little better. And it seems to be kind of idyllic and nice.
One of the best parts is Miss Dudley has like 4 or 5 different escape routes from the kitchen.
Yeah.
Because like, and that's like setting up the fact that like, just get the hell out of the house once things start to go down, and like you need to have an exit close by. There's literally like a kitchen that leads out to like some sort of balcony or something, or some sort of veranda. I don't know, something like that. And they all lead to the same place, and just 5 doors leading outside so you can quickly get out.
Yeah. A great detail. And then the idea that would be safe, though, is turned on its head by multiple times where things get really fucking wonky and like funhousey when she's out there. Like, it's the only way I can really describe it. Like, it starts bending reality. She gets separated from Theodora and Luke at one point, and she starts like seeing footsteps in the grass and then out onto the water, and like just creepy, like surreal stuff. And then they seem to like laugh at her expense when she kind of comes back to them, and again it starts to feel like these wedges are being driven between her and all the characters.
I gotta ask you about a couple of specific things though. So it's like this takes place over a few, I don't know how many days specifically,
it's like
but multiple days
week,
and nights,
I think. Approximately.
So each night, or seemingly some of the nights, creepy shit happens, and then the next morning they're like, it'll be better, and then they wake up the next morning, they're still there. I think most rational people, I know that like they were excited to, and I think that's what Shirley Jackson's doing with having it be like a study that they're trying to figure out, because otherwise you leave the house. You're like, this is too creepy, I gotta get out of here.
Instead it's like they've agreed. On the door. But then the thing with Eleanor, and I think one of the reasons she stays, is she has nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And she's kind of she's bet everything on this. So where would she go if she, you know what I mean? I mean, we know like you could go anywhere. I mean, it would be hard, but like it's better than Hill House. Right. Yeah. But I think she's worried about having to go back to the life she hates. So she's trapped, and I think that becomes important as we get into the final paragraph here. Before we do though, like the planchette. I
was gonna say
made me think of The Stand. I think that was the last time we read about a planchette, right?
Right. Yeah, I actually thought of that scene with young Nadine.
Yeah, Nadine, yep.
The planchette is important. That's something we have to talk about. And then also Miss Montague being a source of comedy, and also a source of just like being the person where you're like, whoa, like don't, be careful, respect the spirits, and don't upset them. And like the way that she's like so confident in everything she's doing,
Yeah.
and it's not going to mess anything up, and you're just like, and honestly, she doesn't really, it's not her fault in any way, anything that goes on. And but what a really funny character, in the way that like it like undermines Montague, Dr. Montague, the entire time. Like, you're like, oh, he knows his shit, and then like his wife comes in and she's just like, this is how we do things. You need to respect all the things that I'm doing. And he's just like, he just listens to her. I think it's it's really funny, and a lot of the stuff that goes on with her is great.
Yeah, it's such a surprise, and a welcome, like a welcome surprise at the end of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, it mixes up the story in a way that I think I was not expecting that story to have anything like that.
Yeah, and so there's a timer placed on the book, which is also a smart thing to do, where Dr. Montague says, "My wife is coming on Saturday," and like it was cool because like they actually didn't really know what day it was. They were like, I think that's in like a couple days. Well, we'll know when she arrives. It was kind of the thing they said,
which is so weird. Like, what a weird thing to not know what day it is.
They're losing track of time. Yeah. But yeah, and so you're waiting for her to arrive, and it becomes this thing where you're like, is this going to be a rescue? You know what I mean? Like, is a new character coming in going to be a source of rescue? Of course it's not. But it gives you something to look forward to, which I think is smart. And then, yeah, she's such an interesting character, very surprising, not what I expected at all of this wife character. Very cool. And yeah, like you said, funny. She's just kind of like a bull in a china shop a little bit. She's just like doing her thing. She's got her planchette. She calls it like the planchette or something, like the planchette says. And
yeah,
she has like a weird relationship with the planchette. I don't know what was going on with this guy she's with. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's like her.
Weird.
There's a lot of companions, and
weird relationships.
A lot of them are mentioned as they have a companion. In fact, the daughters, one of them has a companion who lived with her, and I don't know if that was just like a euphemism at the time for like a lesbian relationship or something.
It seemed like it to me,
yeah.
But who am I to say?
Hard to know, but I definitely see like there's grist for the mill if you wanted to see it that way. There's a lot there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even the relationship between Theo and Eleanor at some point, you're like, I think that clearly has some of that in there for you.
I thought so too. I think there's
Yeah.
a moment where she mentions something about being a lesbian. Theodora does to Eleanor.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like borderline flirtatious a little bit, like maybe kind of testing the waters to see if she's interested in that sort of thing. So and they have this, close relationship that you could definitely see as sisterly, but there is a little bit of that too. And just enough to where I think it leaves it open for interpretation. Like, is there something romantic there? Is that why she feels so betrayed when Theodora
There's like
seems
a friendship
to have something
love
going on with Luke?
Yeah, there's a friendship love that you kind of could take for romantic love as well. And then like nearing the end, Eleanor wants to leave and go with Theo. Or like around,
yeah, she really
maybe not
wants
quite
to.
the end,
Well,
but...
because think about it, that makes sense because she has no other recourse, and so she all of a sudden is like, "I'm going to go with you." She also has seemed to kind of like had this whole fantasy in her mind about what that's going to look like.
And Theo is like completely against it, which I think pushes her directly into the open arms of Hill House.
Yeah. So let's read that last paragraph. So, fearing for Eleanor's safety after an incident where she climbs up a dangerous winding staircase, Dr. Montague and Luke declare that she must leave. Eleanor, however, regards the house as her home and resists. Dr. Montague and Luke force her into the car. She bids them farewell and drives off. But before leaving the property grounds, she propels the car into a large oak tree and is assumed that she is killed. And then we actually end on the same paragraph. Like, it's kind of cool because it like doesn't start the same way, but then it goes back into it. It starts as a different paragraph, different ending, and then all of a sudden we're reading the first paragraph again, and it ends on the Hill House. People who walk there walk alone. And I got the implication that that is the fate of Eleanor, that she now is, she is the thing that walks alone in Hill House now.
Well, next people who come to stay might be dealing with Eleanor instead of whatever was there before, or maybe in addition to,
yeah. She's at one point in the book says she's afraid of being alone. And it's heartbreaking because I think the implication is that Hill House, if you're there, you're alone. So she is forever now trapped in this, seems like, or maybe another 80 years or whatever, is trapped in this house and is alone. So her worst nightmare comes to be. And there's also this chilling moment, or I found it chilling, where she's totally... So the reason she drives into into the trees. She can't imagine leaving, and she's like, I have to stay here. I have to stay here. And
they're all forcing
they're
her
forcing
to
her to go, and she's like, well, they can't stop me from doing this. And so she runs into the car, but right before she hits the tree, she has this like moment of clarity where she's like, what am I doing? Someone needs to stop me, you know.
Why am I doing
this? And then she hits the tree. So she like has a moment of clarity after like all this, because she's gone full madness at this point. Like her thoughts are off the deep end, you know, totally compromised by the house. And
we mentioned like she wakes up kind of, and there's this weird moment where she like the inner monologue of Eleanor then realizes, like somebody calls out for Eleanor because Theo realizes she's not in her room anymore, and the inner monologue is like, oh yeah, I forgot about Eleanor. And you're like, wait, this is Eleanor's internal monologue saying this. So you're like, holy shit, she's like gone. And she's like banging on the doors on her way down the hallway, and she's dancing around with Crane.
Yeah.
She goes up the staircase eventually, like we talked about.
She doesn't even like realize why she's up there, and you know,
Right. Really creepy. And then they have to go up and get her, and there's this tense scene where Luke goes up to get her, and it's like on his way down. You think something's going to happen the whole way down.
Well, he also like it could have been this heroic moment for Luke. But instead, he gets up there and he starts saying, like, I'm going to push you off if you don't settle down. You know, he starts being a huge asshole. Yeah. And that's just like...
I don't even know if we mentioned, like, Luke is supposed to inherit the house eventually. Yeah. So, like, that's an interesting perspective for him to see, like, all this creepy shit going on.
Yeah.
And, like, even through all of it, he's still like, yeah, no, I'm going to do this with this room, and I'm going to do... And you're like, oh, really? So, like, even with all this creepy stuff, you're going forward with your plan to...
Yeah, although at the end, I think it said that he like goes off to Europe or something. And, like,
Paris.
Paris, yeah, you're right. And he's like, so whether or not he's going to actually come back, I think is open question.
Because of how they all realize how much it changed Eleanor.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah.
Near the end,
one of the things I really liked, there was a detail at one point where she can hear anything that's happening in the house.
Yeah,
that is like she like is becoming the house in a way.
So early on, they can't hear it. Like someone will be saying something or yelling or something, they can't hear it because there's so many doors and it's so winding. And then eventually, she has like super sensing hearing.
Yeah, she can like hear someone coming out of a room like in another part of the house, and like she knows that they're walking down the stairs and all this stuff. Yeah, I mean things just start to get weird. Like she gets entwined with the house, you know, and that becomes the trap for her that she can't escape. So, like I said, this book, just incredible. I really loved it. One of my favorites I think we've read on the podcast. And it's going to be a tall order for the show to somehow surpass this. But I'm going in with an open mind. I've liked some of the stuff we covered Mike Flanagan for Dr. Sleep, I believe, which was pretty solid. So I'm interested to see what this is. I know he's like well known for this series in particular. So I'm excited to see what that's like.
He's honestly a really cool voice in horror. I think like he's like he's doing a lot with Stephen King properties, and he's done a lot recently.
So
I think he's great.
I'm curious. I'm excited for the show. And at the end of it, we will make a judgment on what was the better version. But that's going to be it for Shirley Jackson for now. I'm sure we'll talk about her in the other episodes in this version of the story. And I'm excited to watch maybe another adaptation on our Patreon. But yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, a great way to let us know is with a rating and review on whatever app you use to listen to this on. If you're on YouTube, throw the episode a like and make sure you subscribe, that kind of stuff. And then just like tell somebody, somebody like Shirley Jackson and you had fun listening to this, let them know, because I would love for other Shirley Jackson fans to listen to this thing, because I had such a great time talking about her, and I think it would be fun.
Yeah. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, consider supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/ink2film. We put out bonus episodes like Luke was talking about. Eventually we're probably going to do another Haunting of Hill House adaptation.
Yeah.
And we have tons of bonus content. We also have other tiers that you can check out, and genuinely couldn't have continued this podcast as long as we have if not for the Patreon. So thank you to everybody over there.
Yeah, and specifically thank you to Chris C, who's been a patron for a long time, big time supporter of us. Thank you so much, Chris. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Also, if you are on YouTube, make sure to check out our tier ranking video. It's like one of the top videos on our channel when you go there. We had a lot of fun with it. I was able to edit together a video, which I had never done before. I had to play around with like putting in trailer clips and all this different stuff. And I would just love to know what people think of it. So if you're interested in seeing some actual video content of us with our faces, check that out.
Yeah. Also on social media, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those at ink2film. Make sure to follow us there.
And thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
Yeah, I just wanted to say again how much I love this book and what an experience it was. I have to give a shout out again to Guillermo del Toro for like ramping up my excitement for this story going in and like seeding it in all of this like horror history and then leading me into this like amazing story.
Cool.
And then I'm so excited for you to check out the show. We're gonna have a lot of stuff to talk about.
Cool. All right, and we will begin our journey with that next week with the first 5 episodes, I believe, the first half, however many that ends up being. And until next time.
Thanks for listening.